Hello everyone, I'm Jim Hemphill. I'm a lawyer with the Austin firm Graves, Doherty, Heron & Moody, where my practice includes First Amendment, media, and open government law. I'm also honored to be this year's president of the Freedom of Information Foundation of Texas. We welcome you all to the FOI Foundation's 2020 Online Awards program. Ordinarily, we would present these awards and open government panel discussions in person at our annual state conference. But like so many organizations, we've shifted our activities online this fall because of coronavirus concerns. We want to help stop the spread of COVID-19. We hope you're all staying safe and healthy. Even in these unusual times, especially in these times, our nonprofit's mission continues as we promote open government and protect the First Amendment rights of free speech and a free press. Throughout our program today, we will bring you highlights from government transparency online events the FOI Foundation has participated in the past few weeks. You'll see we've had important conversations about the need to update our Texas open records and open meetings laws. Some of these issues were around already, but the onset of the pandemic this year brought existing and new open government problems into full view. I also would like to take a moment to note that today's program is dedicated to our Joel White Memorial Scholarship. Joel was a passionate First Amendment attorney, a longtime FOI Foundation board member, and a past president of our foundation. He passed away in 2018. We've been working to create a scholarship fund in his memory to assist college students who are interested in First Amendment and open government studies. Donations to the fund can be made through our website, foift.org. Now, on to the awards and highlight show. Every year we present the Nancy Monson Spirit of FOI Award to Texas news organizations. The award recognizes outstanding efforts that uphold First Amendment principles, increase public access to government, and improve awareness of open government laws. We honor winners in two size categories: Class A for news markets with a population under 500,000, and Class AA for news markets with a population of 500,000 or more. The winners have already been notified, and their trophies have been shipped to them. Now we get to formally honor their important work. This year's Class A winner is the Highlander, based in Marble Falls. The newspaper championed open government for the people of Meadow Lakes when the City Council instituted overly restrictive rules for its public comment period during open meetings. The Council also suggested citizens could be charged with a crime for what they say. The Highlander reported on how these rules likely violated constitutional free speech rights and attempted to weaponize the Texas Open Meetings Act. The contest judge wrote, quote, "The reporting and attention by the local newspaper made a difference. At the next meeting, the City Council rescinded the limitations." Congratulations to the Highlander. In Class AA this year, there's an honorable mention and a winner. Honorable mention goes to KXAN in Austin for its investigation of Texas law enforcement officers who surrender their peace officer licenses as a bargaining chip to get lenient sentences and avoid prison for violating the law. Congratulations to KXAN. The Class AA winner is the Dallas Morning News for its persistence in reporting on the death of a man who was restrained by police after he called them for help. It took nearly 3 years to get the public records related to the death. After the city of Dallas refused to release the records, the Dallas Morning News went to court to get them and won the legal battle. Our contest judge noted that video footage of the police encounter helped the community better understand what led to the death of a man suffering from mental illness and demonstrated the power of the public records law. The contest judge wrote, quote, "The Morning News championed open government by not giving up and persisting in the fight to uphold the public's right to know." Congratulations to the Dallas Morning News. We'll be back shortly with the announcement of another prestigious FOI Foundation Award and the State Bar of Texas Gavel Awards. But now, let's watch a brief highlight from a recent online open government panel discussion that explored roadblocks to information that many Texans are facing amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Senator Judith Zaffirini hosted the virtual event, and it was co-sponsored by the FOI Foundation and other open government advocacy groups.
Plato wrote so long ago that we can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when adults are afraid of the light. The Texas Public Information Act and Open Meetings Act are built upon a very simple principle. The people deserve to know how their governments are run and how their tax dollars are spent. And those entrusted with power have a responsibility to tell them. In other words, we should not be afraid of the light. The availability of information is essential to a functioning democracy. It prevents elected leaders from saying one thing and doing another. It upholds the rule of law, and it ensures that government funds and services are distributed fairly and forms a bulwark against the sort of endemic corruption that exists in other parts of the world. These safeguards, in turn, allow citizens to have faith in our government. Public information and open meetings laws could not be effective, however, without you, the practitioners who join us today. We are grateful that you use them so effectively to investigate and ultimately to inform the people about what's happening at the Capitol, City Hall, the county courthouse, or at our state agencies. For you, these laws are essential tools, not weapons, as those with something to hide might claim, to unearth the truth or simply to enhance understanding of the inner workings of complex bureaucracy. We who constantly strive to improve the state's ability to serve its residents faithfully, efficiently, and equitably applaud your efforts and welcome your advocacy to ensure the tools you employ remain timely and effective. This is not an abstract concept. There are numerous high-profile examples of investigative reporting that employed public information requests to major policy changes. In 2016, for example, Houston Chronicle reporters sifted through vast quantities of education data to reach a horrifying conclusion. A state funding standard that had created an artificial cap on special education throughout the state, leading thousands of young learners to be denied the services they needed to thrive. We addressed it in the legislature next year because of that. Sometimes those requests reveal what we don't know. A highlight of the 2019 session was a slew of reforms regarding how Texas regulates and monitors childcare facilities. Our efforts would not have been possible but for the work of Austin American Statesman reporters, whose inquiries unearthed not only shocking revelations of delinquent oversight, but also glaring gaps in the information we collect and employ. There is nothing more important than the safety of our children. Yet it took a team of journalists deftly employing government transparency tools to discover such horrific negligence. These stories reveal an obvious truth. The more complicated our government becomes, the greater the potential damage of poor stewardship or outright abuse, and the greater the need for transparency. This is especially true during emergencies, whether they're hurricanes, pandemics, or even recessions. The public's right to the truth never changes, but its need for it is never greater than during times of crisis. The last 6 months have been unlike anything any of us has ever experienced. Our state has had to rely entirely on our executive branch for everything: developing health guidelines, distributing federal funds, contracting for PPE and contract tracing, and reporting health data to an anxious public, all without legislative oversight. Such an unprecedented situation has posed new challenges. Without intragovernmental checks, how do we know that we're being governed responsibly? I'm excited to hear from our expert panelists about the adequacy of our government transparency laws during emergencies, what has worked, what hasn't, and what we need to do to fix all of these problems during the legislative session that convenes in January?
There's a lot for us to go through here. Obviously, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so it's affecting everything. I want to start here with Jay Avila.
Yes, I just wanted to start off that, the importance of open records and having access to public records and to open meetings is just, it's so important for the public because as you mentioned, otherwise they would have no idea of how their tax money is being spent. And also they wouldn't have a full knowledge of what their elected officials are doing, the government agencies that those officials oversee, what they are doing. And we've seen in this pandemic that access to accurate information can actually have a life or death impact on the public. And the best example of that is what's happened in Texas with nursing homes and assisted living facilities this year. In San Antonio, we had one of the first big COVID-19 outbreaks in nursing homes, and eventually 4,200 people across the state have died, and about 800 of those facilities have been affected with some cases. And back in April, families were in agony because they couldn't visit their loved ones. Some of those loved ones had dementia. They couldn't communicate with them by phone. And many nursing homes and assisted living facilities would not give them any information, citing the state's medical privacy law. Now, relatives would call up our newsroom and they would be frantic. They weren't asking for the names of individuals to be released. They were just wanting to know if their loved ones, if the facility that housed their loved ones had any cases, and the state just wasn't releasing that information. And other states at that time in April were releasing information about which facilities had residents and caretakers who had gotten sick or died. But Texas was not doing that, and some families only found out tragically that the nursing home had multiple cases or deaths after their loved ones died. And a family member in College Station said that this information, if they had it, they might have been able to make alternate arrangements for their loved one, perhaps. But Texas didn't start releasing this basic information until late July, after an Attorney General's office ruling, and that was in result to a request by the Freedom of Information Foundation. But for months there, families were in the dark, and many have now become advocates for open government after the experience that they went through this year.
We had a number of comments from journalists around the state saying they had run into the same experience with skeleton crews and school districts not responding to requests. Does an agency have to file the notice in order to use the skeleton crew excuse or not?
No. So the skeleton crew, that's been a longstanding interpretation by our office that a skeleton crew day is not a business day for purposes of the Public Information Act. So no, they do not need to file a catastrophe notice in order to consider themselves closed on a skeleton crew day. What the disaster or the catastrophe notice, what that's really for is where a governmental body is open and they're operating, but because of a catastrophe, they need to focus their efforts on other things, right? So that's where a catastrophe notice would come in. Is okay. The flood came in, it washed away the city offices. When we're not open, those aren't business days. But once the city opens back up, if they're doing a week's worth of cleanup or they need to get their records back in order, then that's where you would have that the use of that catastrophe notice.
Is there a generally accepted definition of what is a skeleton crew?
So we have some rulings that talk about that. What we're going to generally look for is that it's been identified as a skeleton crew day by the governmental body. So that really depends on the circumstances. It's not enough just that the person who handles Public Information Act isn't there that day or is sick. It needs to be some type of official recognition by the governmental body itself, not just an informal person's not here that day. We have seen those over the years where they will say, well, this person was out on vacation, so it's a skeleton crew day. Well, that's not a skeleton crew day there. It needs to be some type of official piece by the government body.
Do you see a time when these catastrophe notices, the whole hold on the release of information will end at some point soon? Because it seems that we're running into a problem with people or agencies continuously filing these, and what's supposed to be a temporary policy is become permanent for the last 6 months.
Right. I hope so. I think that a lot of that is certainly not under my control or really any of our control for when the COVID pandemic slows down or stops impacting these governmental bodies. However, that is one of the things going into the next legislative session that I do think is worth a look at. When that statute was passed, I don't think anyone was thinking about a disaster that would impact a governmental body for more than 2 weeks. And so there's nothing in the statute that talks about how many notices can be filed, right? You can file a notice and then you get an extension, but there's nothing that says you can't file another notice right after that. And I think that's what you're referring to there. So I think that's something that certainly could be looked at and clarified under the Public Information Act during the next legislative session to kind of confirm, no, we meant 14 days, or there's some cap for each disaster, or there's a limit for the number of disasters. Because you could say, first we got hit by a hurricane, then we got hit by the flooding, then it was the rain, then it was the lightning, and you can string them together like that. And I think that's something that as the PIA gets modernized heading into the next legislative session, that would certainly be worth looking at in light of what we're seeing, not just from COVID-19, but from other disasters.
Greetings. The State Bar is grateful to the Freedom of Information Foundation of Texas for sharing with us this platform to recognize excellence in legal reporting across this great state. Journalists play a vital role in our democracy, illuminating injustices and enabling an informed public to manage its resources. The Texas Gavel Awards, hosted by the Bar's Public Affairs Committee, recognize excellence in journalism that fosters public understanding of the legal system, educates the public about the rule of law, the legal profession, and the judicial branch, and discloses practices or procedures needing correction to improve the justice system. This year's entries were judged by an independent panel that included out-of-state current and former journalists, editors, and professors. The journalists we are honoring explored some of the most complex issues that Texas lawyers, legislators, and judges face today. All of the award-winning pieces can be viewed on the State Bar's website at texasbar.com/Gavel Awards. In the print major metro category, the Texas Gavel Award goes to Tony Plahetsky of the Austin American-Statesman for his work reporting the story of a Williamson County man's wrongful conviction for sexual assault of a child. In Life of Shame, Plahetsky was the first to report the story of Troy Mansfield, a father who, after being falsely accused, was coerced into a false confession and plea agreement as prosecutors withheld exculpatory information in his case. In vivid detail, Plahetsky lays out for the reader how the injustice was carried out and how it led to a lifetime of repercussions for Mansfield. The story culminated in the discovery of the exculpatory information by a lawyer and ultimately the reversal of Mansfield's conviction. One Gavel Awards judge remarked, "This is an excellent example of how justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied, albeit in this case, the delay exacted a terrible price on its victim and his family. The reporter is to be commended for his well-written and sourced account." Plahetsky is an award-winning journalist whose work spans print, television, and digital media. Since 2000, he has been a member of the Austin American-Statesman investigative team and often focuses on law enforcement and criminal justice issues. In the broadcast major metro category, the Texas Gavel Award goes to Nadia Hamdan of Austin's NPR station, KUT 90.5. She wins for the provability gap, a 4-part broadcast that explores why, in a year in which Austin has had the highest number of reported rapes among large cities in Texas, only one person was convicted of the crime. The series explores why so many sexual assault cases go unpunished and the difficulties of creating a justice system that is survivor-focused. One Gavel Awards judge commented, "Truly a great podcast that takes a step-by-step look at the systemic and complex problem in our society and the efforts to change a broken and unbalanced process." Another judge called it informative, thorough, and compelling. Hamdan's reporting has been heard on NPR's Morning Edition, All Things Considered, Here and Now, and the BBC World Service, among others. She received her bachelor's degree in International Relations and Global Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. In a rare tie, Texas Gavel Awards judges have selected entries by coworkers Jolie McCullough and Emma Platoff of the Texas Tribune as winners of the online-only category. McCullough wins for a 4-part series on intellectual disability and the death penalty. In 2002, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that executing people with intellectual disabilities is cruel and unusual punishment, but left it up to the states to devise their own standards for determining whether someone was intellectually disabled. The Texas legislature has not created such standards. Together, McCullough's stories illuminate the struggle of lawmakers, district attorneys, judges, and advocates as they attempt to answer a key ethical question. How should the state make the life or death decision about whether an inmate is eligible for the death penalty? One judge noted, "This series demonstrates both the watchdog mission of journalism and the bulldog tenacity to stick with an important story through all its legal twists and turns." McCullough reports on criminal justice issues and policy for the Texas Tribune. She is a graduate of Arizona State University's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication. Emma Platoff wins for her story about how the Texas legislature saved billionaire John Paul DeJoria $123 million. After a failed oil deal in Morocco, DeJoria was ordered by a Moroccan court to pay $123 million to his ex-business partners. Instead, he turned to a trio of lobbyists and got the Texas legislature to change the law, enabling what the courts would not allow. One judge described Platoff's piece as an illuminating TikTok of how money and lobbyists can change Texas laws, even for one man, a case study in how sausage and laws are made. Another judge said, "We need more stories like this to hold our elected officials accountable and to keep their actions transparent." Platoff covers the law and its intersection with politics for the Texas Tribune. She is a graduate of Yale University, and this is her second Texas Gavel Award. Congratulations to all the winners. And thank you again to the Freedom of Information Foundation of Texas for helping us honor great journalism.
Thanks to the State Bar of Texas for joining us today in honoring excellence in journalism. Congratulations to all the Texas Gavel Award recipients. Now it's time for our second highlight from a fall government transparency event. This one was hosted in late October by the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Participants included FOI Foundation Vice President Arif Panju. Panelists discussed the overall importance of the Texas Public Information Act and delved into some structural problems and barriers to information that have become more pronounced since the pandemic set in. Let's take a look.
You know, at the Institute for Justice, we litigate constitutional cases, property rights cases, First Amendment cases, economic liberty cases, educational choice cases. And we come across the need to see what the government is actually doing in the context of exploring whether someone's rights or a broad array of rights are being violated. The Texas Public Information Act is indispensable. And it is indispensable precisely because it makes clear that the people subject to the laws of this state must be able to see what the government is doing, what they're actually doing, and how they're doing it. Of course, the Texas Constitution protects rights, just like all the other 49 state constitutions where open record acts exist. And state and local governments are created to protect those rights. And the TPIA has to be viewed against this backdrop. The Texas Public Information Act was designed and tailored to ensure that people can see what their government is doing with the immense power that we give it, with all the resources, tax revenue that we give it. Now, unfortunately, today in 2020, it's becoming clear to everyone that the TPIA has been flipped on its head. It's not something that just happened because of the pandemic, but the events of the past 7 months have served to lift the veil on the inexcusable gutting of the TPIA and the real world effect that has on Texans' ability to hold their government accountable, to see if people's rights are being violated, and just their ability to know, whether they can properly inform themselves before going to the ballot box, to see if the people entrusted with carrying out the government's powers and bending the levers of a government power should be given another chance. And so originally intended and enacted, the TPIA, and I'll just pull a quote from the act, says that each person is entitled to complete information, about the affairs of government and the official acts of public officials, end quote. And it also says that the government does not have the, quote, right to decide what is good for people to know and what is not good for them to know. But in practice, unfortunately, the TPIA has turned into a tool that helps the government avoid providing information. And this flipping of the statute on its head ignores the original intent and the purpose. And this has really happened on two fronts. And both of these fronts require just robust legislative action to remedy. And to be clear, the time is now, because I think now you get the sense that everyone can see that in an emergency, you want to know what the government is doing. That's when it's exercising powers that are reserved for extreme times, and the powers are broad, and it's important that we see what's going on. So one of the big problems with the TPIA is structural. Over many years, you have a statutory architecture where this administrative process that's baked into it, the TPIA creates an administrative process that a government entity can invoke repeatedly with every single PIA request for information it receives that allows it to not disclose information by claiming that exceptions apply. And they kick off a letter to the AG's office, and the requester has to wait. And they wait, and they wait. And abusing this administrative process has little to no consequences. And to be clear, I've done open records requests with local governments, with state agencies, and it's almost reflexive sometimes that this is the response. In other words, the response is not to provide the information. And again, the TPIA makes clear that this information belongs to the public. It's presumed to be public. Withholding it is the exception. But because of this administrative process that's baked in, with a lack of consequences, no statutory penalties, you have the government just routinely using it as a matter of course. And so it's a low-cost way for them to avoid complying with open records requests. You see this on full display now during a pandemic, especially because they can actually add on to this by saying, well, we're technically closed too. We have a skeleton crew, which the AG's office can deem a skeleton crew. And people working from home, apparently, is a skeleton crew, despite the fact that we have Zoom and internet and, electronic records.
Arif really kind of laid out, well, here are the things that need to be fixed. So what are you and the team at TPPF doing to try to address them?
Great question. So thanks, Ellen, and Arif's got me fired up. I'm ready to get to the next legislative session and get things done already, put us back on a better footing. Now, when you look at the Public Information Act, very much to Arif's point, I would actually encourage the audience to go and look at the preamble of the PIA, Chapter 552 of the Government Code. I don't say this normally about state law, but it's actually very well written. There's an inspirational element that's embedded in that preamble that really tells you about the intent of the law when it was created. Now, to kind of buttress Arif's point, it's been eroded over time by a number of exceptions that have also come alongside it. And I think that erosion has really been to the detriment of the public's ability to access all this good data and information. In addition to that, what we're also seeing at the local government level is an outright stonewalling of the release of certain data. And what I would point you to, there's about 5,000 to 6,000 different local governments. So it's hard to tell exactly how many are not releasing public information right now. But let me just point you to 3 examples. If you look at the top 5 most populous cities in Texas, at least 3 of those right now are not releasing information. You have the city of San Antonio, the city of Dallas, and the city of Fort Worth, all of which have a very clear notice posted on their website that says, due to COVID, we're and the unavailability, the staff that's not at the building right now, we're not able to release government information. And I think that, again, that's much to the detriment of the public's ability to know what's happening and why. And because I'm a fiscal guy, one of the things that I immediately got curious about was, okay, well, you have 3 of the largest cities in Texas which are denying access to public information. And by the way, the combined population of those cities is about 4 million people, right? So those 3 cities are denying information. Out of curiosity, did they pass a budget that reflects that diminished nature of the PIA, right? And at least in one case, in San Antonio's case, they actually had a 20% increase in the department that oversees the PIA. So here you have, on one hand, San Antonio telling people that they cannot have access to public information, but on the other hand, they're having a huge budget increase. Now, in the case of Dallas and Fort Worth, they had very small decreases, about $50,000 a piece. So even in those instances, you're seeing the budgets be maintained relatively steady. But all of that to say, I think there's a lot of issues at the local level when it comes to the release of public information. Fortunately, you have a number of good government groups on both the left and the right who notice the problem and are stepping up to find solutions. And I don't say that flippantly, because in the last legislative session, what you saw was about 12.5 different groups representing every end of the political spectrum come together, marshal their resources, and do some big things with regard to open government laws. The legislature, thanks to Chairman Hunter and a lot of other great members, we were able to marshal through some big reforms on the PIA, the Open Meetings Act, and we actually got close on several other initiatives. The folks behind that group, which TPPF is a part of, are reconstituting that coalition, and we're going to hopefully march forward in the next session with some really aggressive agenda items structured around rebuilding public trust and giving greater access to public information. And the 3 key categories that we've been able to identify that need the most attention are transparency in modern times, transparency in emergency, and transparency in record responses. And perhaps we'll get into what all is behind those 3 different buckets. But just know that there are about 12.5 groups who are gearing up right now to hopefully tackle some of the big issues that have come about during this pandemic and certain local governments' refusal to engage in the public information process.
Chairman Hunter, so tell us what your plans are for next legislative session. I know that we have identified a lot of issues here, and this is something that's been exacerbated by the pandemic, but certainly not something that was free of problems before it. It's been something that you've been working on for a long time. So give us a preview of the legislative session and kind of the specific issues that you hope to address.
The first thing is, the other speakers have said, it's open government. It's not, let's put every obstacle in front of getting information to the public. We've got to remember the whole theme of the law: open government, understanding government, transparency in government. And we can't forget that preamble, as they said, and we cannot forget the philosophy. If you really believe in open government, don't use it as a game to not give out information. And we have a lot of frustration in the public because they make their requests and then they have to go through cost issues, delay issues. And then how many lawyers do we have to get into the process to stop getting information to an average individual person just trying to get information? So take those themes. Pandemic. This gave me a great opportunity. Let me tell you something. When did we ever think we'd see surge teams? When did we ever see testing in nursing homes, disinfecting nursing homes? I mean, we have gone through more technological. Now we're all talking Zoom. We're in virtual. You got to now know what a WebEx versus a Zoom, but that's good. That's good, but it doesn't mean that you get to provide information to the public. One issue, nursing homes. Let me tell you something. We have loved ones. Let's not make life tough on our loved ones or the families. Think of all of you, everybody listening, everybody watching. You have somebody in a nursing home, a facility. Why are we going to get delayed in getting information? You look at social media, next thing we know, there's a spike. Well, one thing I'm looking at is the production of information easily to the public in connection with nursing home and nursing assisted living. That information should be out to the public. Whether you're media or you're an individual, that is constructive information. In the whole healthcare arena, we need to be more open because we're all affected. The one thing COVID-19 did is it connected all of us. And another issue I'm big on is mental health and mental health awareness. You know, the last thing we need to do is create anxiety, depression, trauma, trying to find out if something's happening to one of our family members or anybody. Mm-hmm. So the nursing area, the nursing home facility area, I'm going to be looking at specifically on providing direct information to everyone. And that should be a good example. Another, I've had the biggest roller coaster ride in the world trying to get birth date information. Now, right now, if you put Todd Hunter in on the internet, you can get my birth date. And nobody stopped you through the open records process. But you try to put that into statute, I have never seen such a prevention of getting information on birth dates. And we used to get that information. So I'll be coming back on trying to make easy access to birth dates. Now, you say, why? Let's take a reporter that's doing a criminal story, a criminal code violation story. You want to make sure you got the right person. And the birth date is a factor to make sure you're writing about the correct person. Or if you're a broadcaster, publishing about the correct person. So birth date information, pandemic release of information, healthcare, easy access release of information. Now they're all going to say, uh-oh, watch out. You might invade the privacy. Now hold it a second. You're not invading privacy if you're not getting out personal information. Doesn't mean that you can't give information about what's happening at a facility, what's happening medically, health-wise, taking care. We're not asking for the divulging of your personal information, but let's not use the federal state privacy laws to prevent common sense information going to the public.
Hello, I'm Leona Allen Ford, Deputy Publisher at the Dallas Morning News and Secretary of the Board of the Freedom of Information Foundation of Texas. Each year, our board presents the James Madison Award to a journalist, politician, academic, attorney, or citizen for outstanding achievements or distinction in the areas of open government and freedom of information. The past recipients have all understood that the public's right to know and transparency are critical tenets in our ability to hold government accountable. They've each championed the cause that public information belongs to the people and helps us understand how elected officials spend our tax dollars and how they conduct business on our behalf. This year's recipient embodies those principles and more. I'm pleased to announce that this year's recipient is the late Karen Blumenthal, a lifelong journalist and award-winning author of nonfiction for young people. Blumenthal, a Dallas native, worked at the Dallas Morning News as an intern and staff writer and returned in 1992 as a business editor for more than 2 years until the Wall Street Journal called her back to run its Dallas bureau. She spent 25 years with the Wall Street Journal as a writer, editor, and columnist. She certainly had her battles with elected officials and government bodies over access to information, but it was while researching her latest book for young adults, Jane Against the World, that explained the issue of reproductive rights in a factual and dispassionate way that she showed just how persistent she was. On her own initiative, she undertook the release under the Texas Public Information Act records in the state archives related to Roe v. Wade, the Texas case in which the Supreme Court recognized the constitutional right to abortion in 1972. She requested the release of the case files and reasonably expected smooth sailing on fulfilling the request, given it was some 40 years later and because of their importance. She persistently challenged the state's refusal to release the information and documented her battle in a Dallas Morning News column. As her friend Paul Watler said in his nominating letter, her nearly 40-year career as a dedicated and relentless professional and compassionate, accomplished journalist and author are highly worthy of recognition for the James Madison Award. Sadly, Karen Blumenthal passed away in May. She was an inspiration to writers and journalists, particularly women journalists, across the country. She's left a legacy of tenacity and persistence that we all can emulate and be proud. And now accepting the award on Karen's behalf is her husband, Scott McCartney. Congratulations, Karen.
On behalf of our daughters, I want to deeply thank you for honoring Karen with the James Madison Award. Karen would have been so thrilled and so proud of this award. She spent her career informing and educating readers. She had a fierce drive to break news. She had no tolerance for liars. Many in the Dallas business community and beyond learned that she couldn't be spun. Karen Blumenthal could cut through BS faster than any reporter out there. When she began writing books for young adults while still at the Wall Street Journal, she brought that same determination to give readers the unvarnished truth. Karen believed deeply that history brings context to what's happening today, and nonfiction books can give young people the tools to make sense of a complicated world. To teach young adults about alcoholism and drinking, she wrote a book about prohibition. When young people were shaken by school shootings, she wrote a biography of the Tommy gun to teach about firearms policy and the Second Amendment. Booze and guns were just the preamble to the work she was most passionate about, reproductive rights. Her last book, which came out in February, just 3 months before her sudden death, is called Jane Against the World. It looks at everything from contraception in the Middle Ages to how the Catholic Church secretly founded Right to Life organizations. The book respectfully presents different points of view. The New York Times called Jane a gripping account that reads like a legal thriller. That desire to tell the whole story led to the open records battle that you honor today. Karen wanted all the materials she could find, including the papers that the state of Texas had from its defense of the Texas abortion law. Assistant Attorney General Jay Floyd's handwritten outline for arguments in Roe v. Wade, for example, is reproduced in her book. Author David Garrow, who is a meticulous researcher, had plowed through 700 pages of notes from the state in 1994. In 2017, Karen wrote to the state library to request the Texas legal file on Roe. The library referred her to the Attorney General's office. Surprised, she checked with Garrow on where he obtained the files. from the library. Garrow still had the microfilm, and he generously shared it with Karen. A digital copy would be better, of course, so Karen requested the papers from the Attorney General's office. It said it was withholding them under attorney-client privilege and work product for a case resolved in 1973. And by the way, the client was the people of Texas. With help from the Freedom of Information Foundation, Karen appealed, noting that she had already seen the documents, and the law clearly states that when released to one person, they must be released to anyone who asks. She lost, but not really. Karen Blumenthal always found a way to do right. She paid $340 to digitize Garrow's microfilm and shared the unredacted Roe v. Wade files with the Dallas Public Library, the SMU Law Library, and the Yale Law Library so that it is in the public domain. And the papers are on her website, KarenBlumenthal.com, which we are maintaining. Then Karen shined more light by writing a detailed story for the Dallas Morning News about the Attorney General's routine denial of Freedom of Information requests and lame excuses to hide government business from the public. Democracy doesn't exist without open records. Accountability in government matters. Transparency matters. What you do with the Freedom of Information Foundation of Texas matters. What Karen Blumenthal did all her professional life mattered. From the bottom of my broken heart, I accept this award on her behalf, and thank you.
Thank you, Scott. We extend our condolences to you and your family, and our congratulations on Karen's life work and her commitment to the people's access to government records. We're reaching the end of today's program. Before we go, I'd like to remind you of the Joel White Memorial Scholarship Fund. Donations can be made online at foift.org or by sending a check to the FOI Foundation's address, which you'll also find on the website. We'd like to thank our sponsors and underwriters of today's program: the State Bar of Texas, the Austin American Statesman, the Haynes & Boone Law Firm, the Jackson Walker Law Firm, and the San Antonio Express News. A grant from the Dallas Foundation also helps to fund our First Amendment programming. Regardless of the conditions of the world that we find ourselves in, please be assured that the FOI Foundation will continue its mission to promote government transparency and defend First Amendment rights. We hope that next year, in 2021, we'll be able to all gather in person to further this important mission. Thanks for your attention and time today.